The rise of mass schooling, intelligence, selection, and ability. To fully make sense of education systems in the present, Scientologist Emil Durkheim suggested that we must examine the conditions of the past. The lengthy journey towards the kinds of mass schooling visible in the global north today grew from social, economic, and political struggles. In this section, the birth of the modern school, and some ideas which emerged from struggles about effective learning, ability, intelligence testing, and selection are discussed. In the 17th century, prevailing views of children as immature and passive vessels, whose minds needed to be filled up with the correct knowledge, influenced the belief that what and how children learn and were taught in schools needed to be carefully controlled. These views were mirrored in various types of forms of schools that emerged in the UK and Western Europe between the 17th and 20th centuries. Many of these early schools were run by churches, a mean to civil communities and to pass on the preferred norms, beliefs, and values of dominant aristocratic white groups. School provisions, access, and quality during this period was highly varied. In the UK, a national standard of schooling was established with the passing of the Elementary Education Act in 1870 in England and Wales. In 1918, further acts of Parliament saw the school leaving age raised from 12 to 14 years and the abolishing of fees in state elementary schools and the basic inspection of nurseries and the school provision for children with additional learning needs. Though many ideas were put forward to further reform schools at the time, economic decline as the result of the 1920s Great Depression meant that plans for change were put on hold. In the early 20th century, John Dewey, an American philosopher and psychologist, argued that schools were dull and boring places that were not conducive to open society. He argued that education should seek to promote a democratic society, and a good school, he reasoned, should be a place where all children could socialize together, irrespective of their race, gender, social class, or religious beliefs. These ideas inspired what became known as progressive education movement, though stakeholders' interest in progressive education approaches began to grow across wider Europe and North America. They didn't really feature in British schools until the 1960s. Instead, very different ideas about children's minds had begun to capture the attention of policymakers and politicians. In the 19th century, psychology as a discipline began to grow, according to educationalist Clyde Chitty. Some psychologists were becoming increasingly interested in the development of the pseudoscience psychometry, never heard that psycho before, metry, the precise measurement and testing of mental ability, states, and processes. At the time, it was believed that intelligence was a genetic and fixed trait inherited at birth in the same way as eye colours or hair colour. Testing by psychometric therefore aim to provide the tools to accurately measure aspects of children's capacity. Alongside other social, economic, and political factors, ideas about intelligence measurements found their way into the design of another major educational reform in the 1944, a three-tier approach to schooling known as the tripartite system. Case study: the three-tier tripartite system. The 1944 Butler Act introduced the entitlement to free schooling until the age of 15 in England and Wales. The Act also introduced the 11 plus, a psychometric test that assumed children's intelligence was innate and could be measured at the age of 11. My mother actually took 11 plus at the age of 10. On the basis of their performance in the 11 plus, children were segregated into one of three schools types based on the assumed to be their unique status of mind. Grammar schools, secondary modern schools, and technical schools. My mother went to grammar school. However, in the 1950s and 1960s, mounting evidence from sociologists, psychologists, and educationists pointed to the flawed nature of psychometric testing at age 11. Well, that's really interesting because a friend's child, I think was 11 and had trouble with some maths. I think it was maybe fractions or equations. And the local church school couldn't teach it to her. I took my mum's 1950s math grammar school book, taught from that, she got it straight away. Wasn't a problem. As an indication of future performance, evidence also pointed to very few children from lower income households being able to pass the 11 plus compared to those from wealthier families. There were also regional disparities in the allocation of grammar school places and further discrimination based on gender and race. Far from creating a fairer system, leading educationalist and campaigner Robin Pedley argued in the 1960s, psychometric testing could not satisfactorily distinguish between supposed natural talent and that which had been learned. I think politicians, before they should be allowed to stand for election, should have psychometric testing. And see an educational psychologist to get their IQ and see if they have any difficulties like neurodiversities. Because how many times has one politician read something out and then the other side just say the opposite, or they haven't listened, or they haven't retained the information, haven't understood the information, or... It's very poor. Meaning that children whose parents could read and write had a significant advantage over those who didn't. The 1967 Plowden report concluded that human intelligence was not solely innate, but rather its development involved a mix of nature and nurture, and that there was therefore no value in the tripartite system. In reality, very few children attended technical schools, and therefore the tripartite system functioned more as a bipartite or two-tier selective education system. In 1976, it was eventually replaced with the comprehensive education system, state-funded secondary schools without selection-based or perceived aptitude. Even though the tripartite system was replaced with comprehensive schools, becoming the most common form of secondary school throughout the UK, at the time of writing, 163 grammar schools remained in England and 69 in Northern Ireland. Early assumptions of proponents of psychometric testing were that intelligence was biologically determined. However, sociologist Alice Bradbury explains that research has since demonstrated that psychometric tests and measures of IQ or intelligence quotient are themselves socially constructed. What this means is that the way language and examples are used in questions designed to access verbal, non-verbal, abstract reasoning. Now that's really interesting because I did a test online and I'm in the top 8% in the world at abstract thought, and I have dyslexia, an IQ of 112. And literacy skills reflect the cultural values, attitudes, and knowledge of the groups who have designed them. Other critiques question whether the single concept of intelligence adequately covers the wide variety of skills, qualities, and capabilities that children and young people can learn. While the use of psychometric tests can support diagnosis of disabilities and enable access to specialist support, Bradbury argues that they have been predominantly used as a political tool to oppress minoritized ethnic and lower socioeconomic social groups. Well, I'm quite upset that psychology labels dyslexia as a mental illness because it is used so they wanted to take my dad into care because he was old and disabled. So they said to the court, Gareth can't look after him because he's mental. I've got zero mental illness, but I do have dyslexia. They don't go to the length of saying what the mental illness is. They just say mental illness. But why shouldn't I be able to look after my father, which I was doing, perfectly happy? He would be still alive now if he was, because he was receiving the care he needed, rather than being put into an old people's home where he's in prison, can't go anywhere, and doesn't have anybody who cares for him, just workers that work long hours for minimum wage. But what I was saying is they just use it against you. They don't even elaborate that it's dyslexia. They just say it's mental illness. Rubbish. It makes me really angry. The social and historical barrage of intelligence testing has had a lasting impact on the ways in which practitioners and policymakers discuss children and young people's ability today. Words like gifted, talented, and special educational needs imply certain hierarchies of knowledge. Researchers David Gilbourne and Deborah Yodel argue that ability is used by education stakeholders as a new kind of IQism. that serves the same purpose of segregation and exclusion as ideas about intelligence did in the 1940s and 50s. This is most visible in practices including ability grouping, setting, and streaming children in the classroom. Now, I found it wonderful because my mum was grammar school and she was intelligent. She's very gifted. And also, my maths teacher in comprehensive school was grammar style as well. He was ex-army. So I was top of my class in maths. I had 86% in my GCSE grade. And that was because my mum was grammar and my maths teacher was grammar, which meant my grades were better. Even though my grammar teacher finished in year 10, my maths teacher finished in year 10, and we had to have the computer teacher for the year 11 maths. In reviewing extensive research on the impact of education selection, Jonathan Ricks and Nigel Ingram concluded that very little attention has been given to long-term impacts of selection on the lived experiences and identities of children. Anyway, they're saying about this being IQism, which is segregation. But the latest policy is inclusive education, which is inclusive in schools, in inclusive special educational needs classes with a class within mainstream schools, which is ridiculous because in that class they're supposed to put behavioural children, disabled children, and non-first language children, which is segregation of language. And it's really bad because obviously behaviour children, it shouldn't be around, say, disabled children or foreign children, because they do have tempers and they do misbehave and can be dangerous. So it's a systemic failure by the government, the schools, the authorities. They don't even have school safety officers within our local police force. Or within each school. Exploring children's participations of ability grouping across primary schools in Ireland, researchers found that internal grouping in sets or streams affected how children came to see themselves as smarter or not as brilliant in relation to their peers. Children placed in high ability groups felt a sense of pride, happiness, and confidence. It's very true. But it is good to be gifted. Or in today's terms, model child. While these in lower ability groups felt a sense of shame, inferiority, and embarrassment. As one child in the study explained, I don't think you shouldn't do something just because others can't do it. Because there obviously is better people. But it's all about, we had a model child in our class. She was very gifted. And it was great to sit next to her, and it would increase our ability. As one child in the study explained, if you're in the lowest group, they treat you like a low person or somebody who is kind of dumb. We only did that to the special education needs class. It would be like, that's the one class I'd never want to be in. That was the class that the rest of the comprehensive school, that was the class where you could be held back a year or have disabilities or be not very good. But it didn't matter what grade. My maths was third level, I think. So the highest GCSE grade you could get was a C. But apparently that was in the year of the hardest GCSE grades. They were messing with the grading system or something. Measuring and categorizing children's ability has influenced the perceived value and expansion of a one-size-fits-all standardized testing regime in the UK, and similarly in Singapore and China. Now, that's quite interesting, right? Because you might have, I went through secondary comprehensive school, and they say one size fits all, but I went through that 30 years ago. Now, as a teacher assistant with an agency, I've been back to that school, and they've lost certain disciplines, like wearing a blazer, not putting your hands in your pockets, having your shoes tied, your shirt tucked in, things like that. Your hair above your collar. And you can see a difference when it comes to the exam room for the GCSEs. People without them disciplines that we had 30 years ago, they don't even participate in the exams. They just sit there and go to sleep on the desk for the exam period and don't do the exam. Whilst we, 30 years ago, who had them disciplines, same school, same systems, did our exams regardless of our ability. If we weren't doing the exam, we wouldn't go to the exam hall. So the one size fits all is dependent on discipline. The World Fiesta highlights that a global education measurement industry has also grown to measure, track, compare, and rank the quality of education systems. Now, I've got to say, I'm in Wales. It was a 300-child school, so nice area. Children were well behaved. In England and Wales, the idea of measuring, tracking, and ranking was taken further to encompass not just children, but also schools via school league tables in another far-reaching set of reforms as part of the 1988 Education Reform Act. In a speech in 1975, UK Conservative Prime Minister Margaret Thatcher argued that to increase equal opportunities, we should do the following. Let our children grow tall, some taller than others, if they have the ability in them to do so, because we must build a society in which each citizen can develop his full potential, both for his own benefit and for the community as a whole. The political rationale was to raise standards by making schools more accountable and to give parents a greater degree to school choice. In these marketised reforms, national testing was made compulsory at age 7, 11, 14, Attempts were made to standardise the national curriculum, and school league tables were made visible to parents. In the 1960s, educationalists like Robin Pedley had imagined a version of comprehensive secondary education where children from all backgrounds could mix, although comprehensive schools still dominate in the UK. Sociologists argue that now another more hidden form of selection happens based on postcode, as families with higher levels of income can use their resources to rent or buy houses in catchment areas of schools that are deemed to be good based on their ranking in schools' leagues tables. While the existence of multiple and varied forms of formal schooling implies all parents have agency in choosing a school for their children, there are hidden forms of selection that can limit access to different families based on their social class, ethnicity, gender, and/or additional educational needs. This means that families with fewer resources cannot exercise the same degree of choice. And over time, formal education in the UK has become highly differentiated and unequal. Key points. The rise to mass schooling in the UK was gradual and unequal process. Views of intelligence continue to influence how children and young people are grouped within and between schools based on perceived ability. School performance, choice, ranking, and measurement has affected how education is discussed, understood, and offered.